There you
What
go.
up?
I think it's like Groundhog Day, isn't it?
If you're watching this episode after the last episode and you feel like we never changed clothes, we did do a double up in recording. And we never changed clothes.
Oh, no, I don't need to change clothes. I got this Combat Chat shirt.
Excellent choice of shirt.
That's it. Will there be an online store? Probably no, I can't be fucked for that.
No. But we have
a couple of ones off.
Yeah.
All right, but we do have a guest. Okay, he's been on our podcast.
A repeat guest.
Yeah. So we don't have to do too much like, background story. Yeah, we can go straight into talking, but like him. So, super promoter, Rebellion, the feeder show Roots, which is coming up soon. Boa Super 8. Okay. It is Mr. Sy Nadji. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, guys. How you guys doing?
Oh, going good.
Long weekend here it's long weekend everywhere, right? But a beautiful long weekend here. Nice weather. How are you going down in the culture capital of the world?
That's much better. I was on 4G and I think Bill Gates turned me off.
Because you want to, don't move. All right, we'll just go. Like, I'll just cut that up. We'll keep going on.
Yeah, no stress. Sorry that.
That's it. Good. All right, mate. Cool. So, look, you're back in action. You got a Root show coming up in May, mate. How's that all been since, like, being all through COVID and that, and then getting back into the promoting business?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like the COVID break was kind of almost the death of it all, and not because we couldn't do stuff, but just being in something consistently and just rolling from show to show. So before I'd finish one show and I'd be already matchmaking the next show. Mm. And then just having a break and going, I was talking a lot about just stopping and things before before it all. But I was just like, why am I doing this? And going through it all and looking at stuff and then just having a break and not being on like Facebook as much. And like, I reckon if they got rid of Facebook, half the promoters would drop off because you wouldn't be able to feed off all the likes and shit on reshares of Facebook. Why else are you doing it? So that was like, I was really close to just getting done with it. And then funnily enough, like the reason I started promoting was because of my Thai trainers. And I always wanted to promote, but like really what got me going was a couple of my Thai trainers when they started teaching in my gym, like they were just, I loved hanging out with them and doing things, and they kind of wanted to do something they'd be sort of proud of. And then our main all Thai trainer, Chon, started coming to the gym to train Spring for her eruption fight. And then this last little bit, he's been coming in and I started kicking pads with him again. And I don't know what it is, just being around him just kind of made me want to do it again. But there'd just been so much shit on the outside of it that was like pissing me off about the scene that I was almost at a point of just like, you know what, I'm like proper done. I was going to message the Muay Thai Victoria guys and say, look, I'll do what needs to be done to get it going, but I'm sort of out. And then I'm like, no, I'm going to do it again and give it a good shot. And like, if I just don't feel like the industry wants to move to a direction that it's not that I'm right, but the industry, I think it should be going. And it's just the general vibe is keep doing the same thing we've been doing for 600 years. Then, I'll go do something else with my time.
And on that, so you're talking about kind of the direction that you'd like to see the sport move and elements of how we're doing things right now that you kind of don't quite like. So I guess where would you like to see things go?
Look, man, I mean, a lot of people in Muay Thai love to bag the UFC and go, oh, MMA, this shit and that shit. It's like, what do you genuinely hate about a sport that allows you to do everything we do in our sport plus other stuff, right? Like, what is it that bothers you about the UFC and MMA? Like, is it that it's newer and it's a billion times more popular than Muay Thai? Like, what bothers? How is it hurting your feelings? Show me on the doll where he touched you, okay? So people say that, but then, and a lot of people go, oh, the UFC has a monopoly. Look, for bargaining and stuff, it's shit for the fighters. End of the day, though, if I said to you, who's the best welterweight boxer in the world, you two guys might have an argument, but there'd be 3 or 4 guys in the running.
Yeah.
If I said, who's the best welterweight Muay Thai guy in the world, depends if it's the Muay Thai in Northern Sydney or Western Sydney world, if it's Melbourne or WA world, like what world are we talking about? There's 650,000 world champions in New South Wales alone. With the UFC, you're going to struggle to argue about Usman's the best MMA fighter in the world. I know Bellator and all those guys do something, but Thai boxing's like, boxing's a joke. Thai boxing in Australia in particular with the titles and the world stuff.
Okay.
It's ridiculous, right? And I'm not saying one person should be in charge of everything, but at least you know that when you win the UFC heavyweight world title, you have the most decent claim to being the champion of that.
Yeah.
If you go to the world championships or the Olympics for freestyle wrestling and you win it, you're the best wrestler in the world. You're not the best wrestler in New South Wales, who's the best wrestler in the world. And like with Rebellion, I always wanted to do the whole Rebellion road to Rebellion routes. The amateurs, as you get in as your entry point as a fighter, and by the time you're the main event guy on Rebellion one day fighting for a WMC or WBC world title, you've got a legitimate claim to be the best fighter in the world.
Yeah.
That's obviously not going to happen, right? But there's a lot of stuff where it's a thing I want to do, and I want to see if the people sort of respond to it, where I'm not going to have titles on my shows anymore. I won't sanction. I won't put a belt on. I'm fairly proud of all the belts I've ever put on the show, like the 3 or 4 Australian WMC titles I put on, like Lloyd Dean won one. The first one I ever did was Mark Saraceno and Mick Seth. They were the 2 best guys at the time. I've done Luis Regis and Alex Ilioski. The last Australian title I put on was Ramesh and Jordan. So I kind of feel like I got a clean conscience relatively with it. But I just look at it and go, how many champions in Australia would you say are legitimately what that title says they are? They're the best in their state. They're the best in their nation. They're the best in the world, intercontinental, East Coast, South Coast, Oceania, international. What the fuck does any of this mean? And so no more belts, no more titles. There'll be Rebellion Eliminator belts.
Yep.
But I want to do that and see, do the fighters who say our sport doesn't get enough respect and dignity, what do they do? Do they go, yeah, I want that, but I got offered a world title and it's my 7th fight. What do they want to do?
Yeah, that's right. It's I never really got the title thing, especially like, in the last kind of 5 years, or like even when when started, you get on the scene from there. Like when I've always gone to promoters, like I want this guy, like obviously I'll go, I want this guy 5 fights because he's had so many fights. Oh, you guys want Tiger? I don't care. I don't put a title. I don't really fucking care because it doesn't really mean anything, especially like, or in Sydney, it's like there's so many different sanctions. It doesn't matter. But I just want a good match. I want 5 rounds. From there, you want to put a title on it, fine. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it really matters to us.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing. I tend to think New South Wales is one of the worst places for this, to be honest, but it's not great anywhere else. Like I'd like to get your thoughts on this. It seems to be this model that like the best way to promote yourself and to be someone that people want on bigger shows. Like I see this week in and week out with guys coming through the amateurs in New South Wales. They've got 17 different belts on in every single one of their Instagram photos, and they've never fought someone from another state yet. And it seems to be this model that like that's the way that you build your brand and you make yourself interesting to the big shows. But like it just seems, I don't think that's the case. And you could elaborate on this more so because you're actually someone who scouts talent and puts on a promotion. I don't think most promoters are looking at someone coming up like, oh, he has 16 Australian title belts and thus he's someone that I want to have on my show. But like I think we're all just passing this model around, and some gyms and do it as well. It's like they're trying to pick, and I understand what they're doing. They want to kind of have that kind of brand interest and stuff like that. But the title thing is, and it's still getting worse. I think that's kind of the problem. I keep coming to points where I feel like it's peaked, but like it is genuinely still getting worse. Because I'm seeing shows now that have titles for 2 sanctions on the one show. Like it's a
bit of a mess.
And like from the promotional side.
tomorrow, and it would be the easiest thing in the world, and it'd be fun. Like one of you guys could do it. Go register a business name for a sanctioning body, right? And New South Wales, you guys have to get laws passed, but in Victoria, the government keeps their hands clean of sanctioning. So I could come up with the Australian United Wrestling Federation, or Muay Thai Federation. Sorry, United Wrestling's a World Wrestling Organization. United Wrestling Federation, United Muay Thai Federation, UMF. There probably is someone, but I register that name tomorrow. The next route show, let's say there's going to be 14 fights. I'll make the first 8 fights an Australian title for UMF, and I'll make the last 6 a mixture of international, intercontinental, and 3 world titles. All the guys in that fight, I'm now a sanctioning body, right? Yeah. I'm a business. Like, end of the day, sanctioning bodies are businesses. We can say whatever we want, and we can hold them to something we want to hold them to, but that's what they are, and you can't blame them for their existence. They make money off sanctioning fees and belts. Yeah. Right. So I make these belts, get them done in Thailand for $250, or one of the 6 million Pakistani guys that send us messages. I make them. I put a couple $100 on top, charge a sanctioning fee, put it on. All the guys on the fights, when they put their post up on Facebook, they say, I'm fighting for an Australian title. And all their mates that don't know shit about UMF or WMPF or WMC or WBC say, I'm fighting for an Australian world title. I will 100% get more ticket sales to my show than if I didn't do that.
Yep. It's a marketing thing.
Yeah, it is. But you can blame the sanctioning body or the promoters, but a big way of it is the fighters to turn around and say, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, if we put a code of practice, a voluntary code of practice for our industry, and put it on Facebook and said, how many fighters will sign up to this? If I haven't won 4 out of my last 5 fights, I won't fight for a title. If I've lost to someone in my own state in the last 2 or 3 fights, I won't fight for a state title. I'll never fight someone in my state for an Australian title unless we're legitimately like, I'm Roy Wills and here's Lloyd Dean, and we have to, because we're definitely the best guys. And I'll never fight anyone from my country for a world title. How many people would actually do it, and how many people would stick it out?
Probably not many.
Not many, yeah.
Not many.
And then who gets on and says, oh, it's a shame our sport's not more professional and we don't get the recognition and the sponsorship and television. Why the fuck is TV going to put us on? Seriously. Guys with 7 or 8 fights being world champions. Like Hugh, you've been on Roots once, and I don't know if you remember, we send out a form saying, put any major titles you have, and I put it in, basically either say major Thailand stadiums, WMC or WBC. I've had people, the stuff that they've sent me, and we've just erased it out. Like someone sending me that they've won a Bangla title. They've legitimately done that.
Yeah.
I've had people, especially from New South Wales, say I'm a 3-time Australian champion in Muay Thai, Muay Thai.
Yeah.
And it is getting worse. You think it's not getting worse? And now the amateur titles. And I said this to Hammer last week. There was 4 events on last weekend outside of hardcore that I know of. And 3 of them were like white collar events. And 1 was just an amateur event. And those 4 events had significantly bigger crowds than the pro show in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And it's like, well, where's our industry at? Like we do all this stuff. We love each other and high five each other. And there's a few like hardcore fans, but that's where the industry's at. And it's become unrecognizable. There's guys fighting for white collar titles in Victoria in boxing.
Yeah.
Like at their gym. It's their gym event. They fought for a title. I saw the promotion for it. And they'll say they're a champion.
Yeah.
And no government will. The government probably doesn't even take us that seriously, but the government's not really going to police us. You can't blame the sanctioning bodies because that's their business. Their business is to make belts and sell sanctions. comes down to the trainers and the fighters. And they're the ones that always say, our sport's not professional enough. So voluntary code of practice, put it up on your Facebook and see how many people sign up to it.
This is a social experiment.
I think that's a really good idea. Like, I've had conversations with people before, like, I mean, and it comes back to the idea of like who enforces it, because we don't have the kind of government involved. Like with New South Wales, as you mentioned, like we've got a lot of Combat Sports Authority red tape. I've always thought, like, why can't the Combat Sports Authority start to have a look at when you're starting to claim a fight? Like, you know, who's in charge of policing integrity? Is that it's like, I think there should just be you can't control how many titles are around because there's multiple sanctioning bodies. But yeah, who can police integrity to say, here's a framework for if you wish to put on a title fight, like to get that upward sort of approval and say, okay, if they've won X of their last Y fights and they are in this kind of standing, someone has to approve it. Because you get, like, for example, like, you know, the WBC has an approval process to put on a title. They don't just allow the promoter to just say, I'm going to put a world title on this fight, and they send it away. It may be not exactly, but that's the, you know, the understanding that I had, and the major sanctions have like this. I've just always felt like, like the more I get into this, the more, someone's got to have, we're policing everything except the things that kind of build a framework of integrity. Because it comes down to the code of practice would be great. Get fighters to agree this is what constitutes a title fight. But then with that agreement comes, I think, like a lot of fighters, if you have enough fights, you have some stupid belts on your mantelpiece. Like, you know, like I have a bunch of them. Like, I didn't care about them. I didn't care about them then, and I don't care about them now. I don't know where a lot of them are. The agreement also kind of has to be, you're not going to pander to your uninvolved mates by, like, it's the one photo. You see it every time you scroll through social media. 2 belts on each shoulder, 1 around the waist, a couple on the floor. Just like, none of these titles mean anything, but just like that, you know, that Floyd Mayweather style display of jewelry supposed to be
brand building.
Yeah, and I understand the approach from these younger guys that they're trying to show that to sponsors that are maybe not involved in the sport as well, and, you know, generate ticket sales. But at the end of the day, when you reach the end of your career, because like that's the other thing I see with these guys is like they're asking for title fights, like not title fights that mean anything. They're saying, get me a title on this show. And it's getting driven at the fighter level. At the end of your career, are you going to feel like you achieved more because you have these nonsense titles? That's what I've got to ask these guys. Does that make you feel? Because like you can have a 5-round fight, you can put a title on it or not have a title on it. It'd be take it or leave it. Are you honestly going to feel different about that fight if you win a belt at the end of it? I would not.
What's the biggest title belt Roy Wills has won that you know of?
Is Roy Wills? I know I watch him for. He's a WMC champion, isn't he?
No,
he's not a WMC champion. WKN.
Maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I don't care, and you
he's
don't
got a
care.
few.
He's a good fighter, but he doesn't have a lot of belts. What's the biggest belt Jordan Godfredson's ever won?
WBC.
The WBC Australian one, but even that, if he hadn't won that, no one's going to question how good Jordan Godfredson is, right? It's the guys they fought.
Yeah.
It would be great if there was one belt that everyone wanted to win, but at the same time, I was part of MTA for a lot of years, and they do a lot of good stuff. But a lot of people aren't just going to want to be dictated to and governed by 3 or 4 people. So you're always going to get people who are going to want to do their own thing.
Yeah.
There's people who are not going to like the way the WBC does. So there's no perfect solution. I left MTA and WMC not because of the local guys, but because I did a shit ton of WMC Australian titles from day one, most of them from 2 interstate guys fighting Victoria. And what I got towards the end was some show in some other states, the only show that's been promoting WMC, got no recognition for all the work with it. And then after I left MTA and WMC, I couldn't get Trevor and Elias refereeing on my shows because I wasn't part of MTA, even though they've done all of this stuff for those years. So when it comes down to that controlling the sport, you're always going to get guys and that alone made me go, I'm never going to go back to that. I don't want to be part of something that puts control on guys who aren't employed by an organization and tell me that they can't ever come and officiate on my shows, right? or someone having, like, the Queenslanders are the perfect example. They don't ever want someone from New South Wales or ACT telling them how they should run their shows. So there's going to be that natural thing with not everyone's going to want to be WMC, not everyone's going to be WBC. There is no perfect solution. But at the moment, do we need titles? Like, I love George Mann versus Charlie Bubbs, legitimately a great fight. I don't care if it's for a paper plate or a thing, because I'm like, that's the best two guys in Australia by far fighting each other. I don't know who else there is in the light heavyweights out there, but the belt's insignificant to me. That's a really good fight matchup. The belts, it's nice, but what does it mean? WMC, what's the WMC world rankings? How do you come up with who's going to fight for the WMC world title? Like, Eddie Farrell got a WMC title in Bangla.
Yeah.
But what was the ranking? And Eddie's a great guy, and I love the dude. But it's like, how did that come about?
Yeah.
And then, when I was in WMC, I used to be one of the guys that made fun of all the WBC titles. Then I was in WBC. I was probably sneakering at some of those titles. And then honestly, just stand back and I go, it's just not at a place where we need to have Australian champions and world champions.
Yeah.
People aren't fighting each other enough around Australia to say who's legitimately the Australian champion. Everyone's fighting in their own state.
Yeah.
Right.
It is. And like, I guess, well, for, I guess, sanctioning bodies, but also like, promotions themselves, like that's the marketing strategy, isn't it? It's like to get eyes on us. It's like, we're going to put the belts on from there.
But Eruption has massive crowds.
Yeah.
And they do an Eruption title. They don't call it an Eruption world title.
Yeah.
But they call it an Eruption title. There's nothing wrong with that. And they probably get the biggest crowds in Australia. They don't put titles on. Paul hasn't done a title in 5 years.
Yeah.
I think the promotions that got the most eyes on them, it's like, is there titles there? Yeah. But like, it's just knowledge of fighters and making the matches happen, the good fights. Yeah. That's what people remember. It's like you said, like, I don't remember titles for certain fighters, but I do remember fights, the people they fought and the matches that they had. That's the main that sticks out.
And then you've got the amateur scene that, I was talking to Kieran the other day, and now there's like amateur shows that you don't know that the guys are amateurs. Like, you wouldn't know that the ticket money guys are charging. Like, there's been events in Melbourne, not for Muay Thai and kickboxing, but other combat sports, where they're charging like almost the same night as a Rebellion, charging $120 for tickets to watch amateurs who aren't getting paid.
Yeah.
And it's like the education of the sport. It's like, what chance do we have ever of getting on TV, getting proper sponsors? Like, and it comes back 100% to the fighters in the gyms, just saying, no, we're not going to fight for titles, and our amateurs are our amateurs.
Yeah.
It's so hard to like I watched Kieran's one video, podcast he did the other day. I thought it was really good. Like, talking about like pros getting treated like amateurs treated like pros. And it's just like the lines are just so blurred. There's no connection. Like these are amateurs. That's all. That's how everyone should be fighting like this. And then the pros, there's no, the lines are so blurred state to state.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep track of. And it's easy. It's easy to fool people as well. Like you said,
easy to fool people,
it's very easy to fool people.
Because you guys in New South Wales, I think for amateur bodies, a promoter has to run it, run the event. Yeah. In Victoria, it's kind of, they try to push back against that, where when you run an amateur event, it's not a thing where I can sanction someone to run an amateur event and run it and sanction it and just like run away with a bag of money. Whereas I think, and then in WA, it's kind of like everyone gets registered with the board and a certain number of fights you fight padded. It's not like boxing where there's amateur boxing, the rounds are shorter. If you fight amateur boxing, you fight 3 2s and then at elite 3 3s. And then to be a pro, to be considered a pro boxer, you got to do the 4 by 3 minute rounds as a minimum entry level. We don't really have that because guys still turn pro and fight 5 by 2s or 3 by 2s, where it's like, well, is that really a pro? So we don't have that from state to state, it's not clear. And then, like, then we still have girls fighting 5x2-minute rounds for some reason when they turn pro.
Yeah.
And then in amateurs, sometimes they wear headgear and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they wear elbow pads and sometimes they don't. Then you turn into pros and you go to one sanctioning body and you can knee to the head, but you can't knee to the head, but you can knee to the body. Then you go to this one and you can elbow here, but you can't elbow there. And you go there and you need a pregnancy test, but on this one you don't. And it's like, how is this a legitimate worldwide sport that on top of it, then we crown world champions of?
Yeah, it's kind of, you make the best point. Like, everyone asks why, it's always that common conversation. Why is Muay Thai not more popular? It's so entertaining. People, there's such a mainstream kind of appreciation for combat sports when Muay Thai kind of doesn't get any love. But then when you look at across the board, the lack of just like, it's hard to even consider Muay Thai a sport in like the kind of, in the governance sense, in that, like, when you go to watch rugby league from the juniors all the way up to kind of all the way up to basically the NRL, it's like there's what you're seeing, whether it's like, this is the rules for a kid's game of rugby league and this is your under 21s. This is what it's got a framework. It's not like you can just have both teams show up and be like, what rules do you want to play today? Or when you can go, yeah, we lost that one, but we forgot that when you play on this field, that offside rule doesn't apply. Like, it's just
when you score a try, it's worth 3 points here, and if you run out of bounds, that's 7 points.
Yeah. That it's like, how can we? It's almost like everyone's talking about what do we have to do to make Muay Thai bigger. I feel like we've not even done the work to get onto the starting line yet, because we're all playing different games. It's like, you've got to just combine resources, and every now and then, I guess you want to be an optimist. I want to be an optimist about where Muay Thai is going, and every now and then you start to see something come together that makes you feel like this is what we need to do. But I don't know if it's infighting or honestly, the sanction versus sanction politicking is at the worst I've seen it in a little while at the moment. I hang out.
It feels like, especially in New South Wales, it feels very reminiscent to like amateur boxing. There's a definite line drawn in the sand between the amateur boxing federation. I don't really want Muay Thai to go that way.
Yeah.
It's like,
but I think we're like our side of it, like our side. When I kind of say our side, I mean like we're more authentic and traditional side. We're almost as much to blame as well, because we become real wankers about it.
Yeah.
Like, we talk down to people. And it's like, oh, you didn't understand why I won that fight. It's like, well, if you're that good and your Muay Thai is so good, someone, just because they're a spaz and they flop around, you should still to kick the shit out of them, and you should really kick them hard enough that they can't do their spazzy shit, because there's no rules on how people should fight. It's just how it scores. And we get to that point of, oh yeah, you guys don't understand, because I've got the thing wrapped around my waist and I put my fighters under the rope, not over the rope. And I give everyone my water out of the metal cup. It's like, are you doing as much to make this sport understandable and uniform? Because like, the alternative for the guys that don't want to belong to that world is to belong to the other world, where they just go, we do whatever the fuck we want. Yeah. And it was funny. I was watching like Hardcore last week, and I thought, man, the 3 Thai trainers were more Western in their approach with putting their fighters in the ring than a lot of the other gyms that were like trying so hard to be Thai.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like the fight style. I mean just like the behavior is just so over the top. It's like, it's amazing. Like in this day and age where they're like real against cultural appropriation, no one's tried to cancel Muay Thai. Even at an amateur thing the other week, I was judging an amateur show, and I'm like, man, like, I see Superboy and Jen Hontong Lek and those guys get their guys in the ring, and they're like, it's 3x2-minute rounds, fully padded, headgear and thick shin guards and 16-ounce gloves, and they just chuck the guys over the rope and they're in and they're fighting. And then you got 2 or 3 of the gyms that are like, I don't know if they can spell the difference between Thailand and Taiwan, and they're acting like they're like Buddhist monks. And I was just like, man, this doesn't make, I don't know, maybe I might be wrong. I'm not saying anything I'm saying wrong, but from my point of view, I go, I don't know if that's doing anything to help it either. Just saying authentic doesn't mean you got to like all of a sudden not speak English properly and have a Thai accent when you speak English, even though you've never left Australia. Does that help it as well? Does that make it more for everyone?
Yeah, you do get this big culture of, you know, just kind of like elitism, like we've spoken about on here before. And like I've spoken with a lot of people of this. I remember I was talking to Kieran Walsh about this not that long ago, that it's like a lot of the time when you have it speaks to what you just said. Like you often have Thai trainers at an event, or you go to Thailand and you realize the things that we have people here just policing about being traditional and being authentic. The people who care the least are the actual Thai people. Like when you go to a real, like kind of like local show in Thailand, like people aren't yelling at each other about, you know, how they're approaching their white crew and stuff like that. And especially when you bring it over here, it's actually like, you know, I guess there's a line like we want to put on shows that have, there's a bit of like tradition and there's traditions to adhere to, but the way that people are so, I don't know if it's an authority thing. Like people want to look like they know a lot, but they just want to point fingers and tell you that something's not traditional or that's not how they do in Thailand. When a lot of the gyms that participate in the sport don't have a direct link to Thailand. And like, that's not a problem. Like there's probably some things like, you know, if you have someone at a show that's going, no, I'm not wearing a Moncon, fuck that. Like, I think that's stupid. Like, okay, you probably got to come on board and play the game a little bit, get some understanding. But once, especially when you're looking at amateurs and you're sort of policing them on how they behave in line with Thailand and stuff like that, it just gets a bit like, that will be really off-putting for people to get involved in the sport. It doesn't create a worldwide platform, a platform of, you know, inclusivity there. And we need participation rate to grow the sport. We need people to be like, Muay Thai looks cool. I'm going to get involved. And then like, if you're showing up to shows and you're getting told that's not how you should be behaving, or that's not how they do it in Thailand. So it's like, okay, well, like, fuck you, man. I'm not in Thailand. I've never been there.
But that's like, did you ever see that series on Netflix? That douchebag dude from Kingdom hosted it. He goes to like 5 different countries and does their sport. It's like Fight World. And I love the Muay Thai one because after the kids fight, they do the translation of what the trainer's actually saying. And everyone's like, puts these poor like trainers on like they're like some god down. And he literally is just calling the kid, you lazy piece of shit. Oh, like it's like, man, they had a bet on that fight. Yep. There was financial things and they're upset. And they're not sitting there giving the kids some like line from Buddha. They're like going, you ruined that. You're being lazy. I'm like, man, did anyone actually hear that? It's like, there's the culture attached to it. And, you know, guys like Andrew and Art, like they live there, they did it. Art's Thai, I get it. And there's other guys that do it. But then some of it, like the forcedness of it, I'm like, that doesn't work either, man. Like, you can bag the gyms that basically flip the Moncon in the corner and climb through the rope. And you can also go the other side's too hard too. Like, it's like the left wing, right wing thing. If you have one extreme, there's always going to be these people on the other side that just go, screw you. We don't want to do 2 rounds of I'm pretending that there's gambling on this and taking it easy and fighting for 3 rounds. So I'm just going to punch on the whole time. And like, how do you fix that where you just kind of go like, it's a beautiful sport and it's got some really nice cultural things attached to it, but do we need to make the cultural stuff more important than the actual sport stuff? Because Foxtel or UFC Fight Pass isn't buying the cultural stuff. So either admit it's a little cute hobby we have where we get to pretend to be something else, or go, okay, whatever this is actually meaningful and respectful and part of the uniform of the sport. Yeah, you wear tie shorts and you wear a Moncon and you go over the rope. I'm not Buddhist. Like people wire me. They run into me at a shopping center and they wire me. I'm like I can't, other than teep, I don't really know any other Thai words. My Thai trainers have tried to explain stuff. People live with me for 3 months to try to teach me Thai. I'm like, man, English is already my second language. I'm going to struggle with the third one. It's like, I don't know. Like I've just started doing judo. I'm not also going to speak with a Japanese accent and just eat sushi every day. Like, I don't know what happens with Thai boxing.
Yeah, it's a weird one. And it's also like, you look at these people, it's I listened to Matt Lucas podcast with Nugget this morning. And I've heard Nugget say similar. I think he might have even said shared a similar sentiment on his podcast with you. And he says I go to a show, and Nugget's what you would describe as a very traditional, very experienced sort of Thai trainer. He's spent a lot of time in Thailand. One of his key issues with the sport is he says, I go to a show now and I see these kids, he's wrapped in a pakama, he's wearing 10 amulets, he's covered in sakyan, and you've got to look at some of these guys and go, do you even understand what any of that means? Like, do you have to adopt every tradition? Like, because you look at like, you know, like you'll be wearing a pakama that you bought on eBay. And, you know, that's quite traditional within Thailand. It might be a piece of family clothing, like the mother's sarong or something, where it's like, but you're adopting that fine, but you know, you just bought it because you thought it looked cool. Like, do you have to wear it? Like, it doesn't have the same cultural significance when you're just doing it because they do it.
Yeah, I've had like two of my trainers when I went to Thailand, came back and gave me one, and then Ton, who, you know, I said he's been the reason I kind of promote and stuff. I love that dude. He's from Isan, and he brought me one on the last time he went as a present. And I'm like, I just honestly, like, I got friends that come to the show. If they saw me walking around, I know it would probably look really cool if I wore it. And I've only started wearing one amulet at the shows, and that's I've got a couple. One that Ton gave me, and one that Denapau's trainer, who I got along with super well, second time after the show, he gave me, and like he explained it to me, and it was like real dear to him. And I'm like, it means something to him. I wear it when I'm around the Muay Thai stuff. The rest of the time, I've got like a Persian one and like a Kiwi one that my mother-in-law gave me because she's a Kiwi. I wear those, but I'm like, I know it would look cool if I wore it, but man, I've been in Thailand for a grand total of 14 days. I can't do that. Like, I tried to do the flowers before one of the shows. I did it for the 8-man. And then I tried to do it for another one. I'm like, man, I just feel like a pretender doing it. I think I'm good at matchmaking and the production side, and I love the sport. And if I wasn't a fat 43-year-old, I'd train it every day. But I can't do that side of it either. Like, it's hard. I understand Pinky. I understand Andrew. I understand like those guys who've been there and done it. But then I just go, do you do this stuff to fill in the void of your actual technical knowledge of the sport? Like, have you watched a lot of Muay Thai and you know that the gamblers and the cornermen do certain hand actions and jump up and down? And is that why you do it? Or is it because that's who you really are? Like, what are we doing it for? It's bloody hard at the moment, eh?
Yeah.
It's gonna feel like it's like, you know, the two camps. It's like, do you, as a promoter and position you're in, it's like, do you feel like a sellout by putting lots of titles on, or it's like, you know, do you feel like you're a pretender because, like, you know, like, oh, I'm not doing all this Thai stuff that all these other sides want me to do as well. Like, you know, where does it all intersect? Like, and it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, what draws this for? What do I like sport? I like all combat sports.
Yeah,
I like violence. That's what it comes down to it. I love the sporting aspect. I love the stories to it, and of course, like, I like people getting knocked out. That's me personally, and all this, like, you know, kind of feels like, you know, fills the void that's inside of me.
Sue me.
But it's funny, man. Like, you know, I the last Prince show, it was K1. There was a lot of Muay Thai people there.
Yeah.
And I took one of my boxers from the gym who's had like 30-something amateur fights. He's going to turn pro. I took him with me to help corner Big Al. And I said, I just want you to see the culture difference of our sport because I've been putting guys in amateur boxing for, I don't know, 9 years. There's like 3 trainers there that say hello and nod hello. The rest of them just... And at the end of it, he goes, man, you guys are all in the back room laughing and hanging out and joking around, and like Charlie and Jaden are in the same room chatting together. and everyone's hanging out. I'm like, man, that's like, to me, that's the amazing side of Muay Thai and even kickboxing in K1. Like, as much as we want to hang shit over it, we're pretty much the same crew.
Yeah.
That side of it is so amazing because you don't get the whole, I'm just like guys warm up in the same room. Like, we've had you've been on the show. Sometimes the changing room's like basically just one big changing room. Everyone trains, everyone jokes around after the fight. All that stuff's the same. We don't set up a guy who shouldn't be there against a really good guy just to put it on. But that's the stuff I really love about it. And what you said about what you got to do and decide, do I put titles or do I not do it? I'm like, I've got to the point where I'm like, there's no good reason why a Muay Thai show should be called after Bob Marley songs. There's like absolutely no good reason for it. But I do it because I like it. It's my personality. There's no like rebellion. I've got the same Salmonella Dob songs that I play, and if it doesn't play, it ruins my, like, it's never not played, but it's important to me. There's things, and it's my personality. And I'm like, if I put those titles on, I'm not being true to who I am. So I've just got to go, I don't believe in it. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm never putting girls on fighting 2-minute rounds when the guys are fighting 3-minute rounds. I'm not putting two really good girls who should be the main event as the second fight just because they're girls, because I don't buy that anymore. And even the ring card girl thing's starting to really play on my mind, where like, I think we've always had tasteful ring card girls.
Yeah.
But I'm like, God, it's like 2021. I was still doing this.
Yeah.
So like, it's got to be your own personality, but it's like, if I do it and I do it for another year and it works, I'll keep doing it. And if it's not, I'm like, I'll just go back to running my gym.
And you use an important word there, and it does kind of bring me in a similar sort of theme, but to something I've been having conversation about, is personality. And I think actually it ties into how we kind of started with, like, the UFC and the way people who are really involved in Thai boxing often kind of just want to bag it, when in reality it's one of the most valuable sports media enterprises in the world. And really, if we're trying to build Muay Thai, we don't have to be exactly like MMA culturally, but we want to achieve the same, or a fraction of the same mainstream success. I find in Muay Thai, it's difficult coming up because you want to be aligned to the side where the kind of the quality training is, and you want to be a representative of the sport. But with that often comes this idea that you have to be exactly like everyone else. Like, it's not a matter of like, you have to, like, I think the conversation often becomes, are guys building brands in Muay Thai? Because it's the individual brands that allow people to gain enough popularity to achieve some mainstream success and sort of take the sport with them. Because at the end of the day, people, they follow the individuals. They're the people who kind of grow the sport with them. Like in the UFC back in the day, it was your Tito Ortiz's, your Chuck Liddells, your Randy Couture's, Forrest Griffins that grew the sport. It wasn't the branding of the UFC. It was alongside, but they need the vehicle to getting people was the people. People invest in people, I think.
Yeah.
And I think a problem that we're finding is, if you act like an asshole, people will think you're an asshole. But if you act in a way that kind of is
Andrew. Here's what's wrong with New South Wales Muay Thai is Andrew Parnham. And people will find that out one day. I'll expose that motherfucker.
We like Andrew, so he lets me have commentary gigs. So I So I think what we find is like, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I think individual brand is what kind of allows you to achieve a certain status. But in Muay Thai, people are very like, they're more interested in integrating to like a template of who you're supposed to be behavior wise. Like, I see this a lot because like I get a lot of messages from guys that are kind of just starting out. I'm lucky in that regard. People listen to the podcast and want to have conversations the same way I message people who actually know something. And I see like people just always want to do the same thing. I see their social media posts. They're like, Muay Thai is about respect and love and humility. It's not a violent sport. Like, everyone's saying the same things. And it's like, they're trying to just like so desperate to sort of project this image. And it's not to say, like I said, like we need that kind of trash talking sort of thing, but people, they don't want to show personality. They want to show that they're aligned with this kind of idea of who you're supposed to be. And like you talk about how cool a Muay Thai show is when you go to the back. And I think when you're involved, that's one of the things that makes you fall in love with it, is the way that you've got this respectful kind of friendly attitude. And like, that's why people become such close friends. But if the sport is the way it is, like when you go to the back, it's something you can just feel and experience. It's there. You don't have to then be desperately trying to put pictures of you bowing at your opponent's feet at the end just to put up some corny caption about how like it's all about love and humility and respect, and we all love each other, and you know, we kiss at the end of the fight in the ring and stuff like that. Like I just think people are too obsessed with like, or maybe the framework that we're working in is like people just desperately want to join this crowd of people who all act the same way. And on the other side of that is we don't produce anything that has some personality. And then I think maybe it comes back to that elitism, is like people don't want to step a toe out of line. Like they don't want to, and that's kind of what sport is. It's just a big batch of kind of personalities. And that's why we get interested in it. Is that kind of something you see?
Yeah, 100%, man. And you know, it's like I win or I learn or whatever else. Like people say these things, they're like catchphrases, and like the number of guys I've seen who jump into fights, lose, and go, it's not about winning and losing. It's like, well, it kind of is. You're fighting to win a fight.
The nature.
And if you're losing a lot of fights, there's very few times like that it's like the skill gap is so deep. A lot of times it's because you don't fucking train, but you think it's really cool to say, what did you learn from your last 7 losses, right? Yeah. And people say that about the respect and stuff. It's like, cool. But if you play tennis and at the end of the tennis match, you walk up and you don't shake hands, you're just as much looked down upon as if you do it in Muay Thai. That stuff is social norms, you know, like it annoys me when jiu-jitsu people always say, oh, our sport's about leverage and efficiency. I'm like, every sport's about leverage and efficiency.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu, if you got 2 guys who are still same levels, the bigger guy's going to win. Weightlifting, powerlifting, where you think it's a pure strength sport, that's about technique and leverage. Yeah. But people want to assign it to their sport, like Muay Thai is about this and that. It's like, yeah, if you didn't do it in boxing, everyone knows Mayorga was like the biggest asshole in the world, and there's people in Muay Thai who are big assholes. But it's like, what is the actual sport? You got to do that, and then this other fruit, like all the, you know, everyone's profile photo will be them in the corner getting their moncon taken off. Yeah. Like, that's great. That's a part of it. It's a small part of it. Training at your gym, training hard, challenging yourself physically, getting in the ring, having a fight, trying to win that fight. That's the reality of the sport. That's like, it's combat. Like it's based on combat. You can be the most, I could be the world, other than what I've said today, I could be like the triple world champion for just being respectful and polite and just be the biggest donkey in the ring. But I'm so respectful. It's like, oh, you're a great Muay Thai. Like, reality of it is, you actually have to do the sport and you got to like develop your own style and win the fight. But like you said, it's like you have to fit into this subculture so much that it becomes more about the behavior of the subculture that gives you that, you know, virtue signaling of what a great person you are, instead of like, are you actually training? Are you learning stuff? Are you listening to your coach? Are you showing up to the weigh-ins on time? Are you actually fighting? Like, are you more about all the fluff around it plus your belt?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that other idea is like, you do see the kind of respect and politeness in this like aura of Muay Thai. People almost want to pull the competitive element out of it. Like you'll see guys and they'll lose a bunch of fights in a row. And there's truth to this, but you get people going like, Muay Thai is not about how many fights you win. You can lose 26 fights in a row and still be the best because you always challenge yourself. Where it's like, there's truth to that, right? There's more in losing fights where you're really stepping up than, you know, crushing cans on your local show. Fine. But at the end of the day, like, it's winning fights that advances you forward in any sporting framework. It's not to say, you know, we don't need, there's a middle ground between having this boxing ideal of putting one loss on your record ends your whole career, and telling Muay Thai guys it never matters about, like, it never affects your status how often you do.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Just fight every 2 weeks. It's like, no, don't fight every 2 weeks, because you get injured and hurt and people get disillusioned and get burnt out. And I used to say this to some of our trainers at the start. I'm like, they're like, it's okay. You know, they might lose their first 10 fights, but I'm like, man, like, these guys, it's not their livelihood. They're not stuck in a thing. If they lose 10 fights in a row, nobody wants to put them on, and no one's going to put them in with a fair fight on their 11th fight. They're going to put them in with another guy that's too good for them. Like, by all means, don't protect your record, be challenged. But man, I see guys being put in with dudes who are going, it's a fight, it's Muay Thai. I'm like, yeah, but hey, what does the guy who win get out of it? Sure, you get it as a trainer. You got this ego where my fighters fight everyone. What is your fighter who just got flogged by a guy who's had 20 more fights and is legitimately good? What lesson did he learn in that he couldn't have learned with 6 months better training? Yeah. What does the promoter get out of it? And it's a professional sport where we're charging people to come and watch. What do they get to benefit out of watching a guy fight that's completely out of his depth? Think about everyone, not just your own personal ego where you get to say, I'm a trainer that does this. I understand people shouldn't protect their records and they should be challenged. And if it's a short notice, you walk in and you cover it, it's great. But just throwing your guys into fights that they don't belong, is that more about your ego, or is it more about what's actually the best for the two fighters, not just your fighter, and the promoter and the crowd? Like, who are you doing it for?
Yeah.
Where's, like, you know, where's the ethics in, like, you know, like managing a fighter, bringing them up properly and making sure that they are ring ready for what they're up against? Because, like, yeah, like, you know, you might chuck a guy in, like, yeah, you got the experience, like, you know, you fucking hung in there, but fuck, you don't know, you might have altered that guy's life in that whole fight. You know, it's like, fuck, you know, it's like, you don't know the damage that's going to, like, they might pop up 5-10 years later just from that, like, that mismatch.
100%. And all of these things, I think, like, they've, like, I put a girl in once into an amateur boxing fight, and there was going to be a 6 kilo weight difference. And my girl was a ball of muscle, and I knew this other girl. I'd seen the photos. I'm like, lean muscle mass, we're probably 30% ahead. Once we actually got in the ring and I saw this girl for the first time, I think the weight difference was more closer to 25 kilos, right? We still won because this other girl, you know, at 87 kilos or whatever, wasn't great. And then the matchmaker, promoter, trainer was the other girl's aunt. I was like, see, Sy, what are you worried about? I'm like, all these things are okay until my girl gets hurt.
Yeah.
And then we have to explain what just happened.
Yeah.
You know, when you have an inquest and you have to go in and say, why was a guy with 9 Thai boxing fights who were all against other people who weren't that great and had only ever fought 3 2-minute rounds, was now against the guy who's, by the only world rankings there is, has had 27 fights and he's ranked and has been fighting 5 by 3-minute rounds, and you've chucked this person from here to here? Oh, it's just Thai boxing, you know, like, we all fight each other. It's like, and there's head impact.
Yeah.
Like, yes, people need to be challenged, but do people in Thailand get a kid that's had 4 fights and throw him into Lumpini against, like, a regular Bangkok circuit fighter? Of course they don't.
Yeah.
The gamblers wouldn't want to bet on that fight. Like, there's odds and stuff, but, like, who's going to want to watch that? Why in Australia is that okay? It's like they don't get hurt, but, like, the fights are so one-sided. It's like, what was the point of that?
Yeah. And it almost comes back to, like, the point that you made, like, if you can't legitimately, as a trainer, boast your stable, like have an elite stable of fighters, you just look for things to cling to, and it's participation medals. Like, oh, my guys fight the most. They fight the most. My boy had 15 fights last year. Cool. But like that's somehow an achievement, like, beyond, you know, that's a lot of fights. Like, well done, mate. Like, you put in a lot of effort, I'm sure. But, like, if he had 15 fights last year and they were all crap. And he's just racking up this record of just going to the ring, getting belted. And your biggest claim to fame as a trainer is that you just sent him out there a bunch of times. You haven't done anything. Like,
yeah, I mean, some guys do it and they know what they're doing. And there's a reason, and some fighters need to keep busy. I understand there's exceptions, and there's guys we know who do it. But the test of if that was effective isn't a year in, it's 2 years, 3 years, and see how many of those guys are still fighting and still enjoying the sport and don't hate that trainer or haven't changed gyms or got 17 injuries in a row that they fought through. It's like, what was it for?
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, what was it for? Like, you can't tell me, as much as I hate him to his deathbed, Andrew doesn't he puts his guys into regular fights. They're fairly even fights. Like, they'll take challenges, they step up, but he does the right thing. Blair and Darren Kurovic, their guys don't just jump in against horribly, like, out of sync fights. They'll take challenges, and guys will always fight a bigger Thai name because they want that. And, you know, paid off with Tyler, right? He beat Somerville.
Yeah.
But this whole thing of, you know, you got the guys who don't want to fight anyone that could remotely touch them because they want to have this perfect record and win, like, a state world title. And then you got the guys who are just like, oh, we don't. It's like, man, is it about you guys? This stuff doesn't have. I can't take the local VF Suburban Football League and just get them to play Hawthorn at the MCG and then expect people to show up and watch it and go, they stepped up. What's the problem? It's like, well, who wants to watch that?
Yeah, and it is that kind of like, I don't know if it's whatever. It's, I guess, like this rhetoric, this narrative we adhere to in the sport, that it's all about, I don't even know how to word it, like that it's all just about honor and stuff like that, where we move away from the fact that at the end of the day, if we build this thing, it's got to be a sport. Like we do, like when you really pull it away and think about how some things work, like I see, and like to one of your points there, I've spoken to heaps of fighters over the years that have moved gyms. And one of the things that comes up in their reasoning is, I couldn't train there anymore because he always thought we could just fight our way through a loss. Like, you know, I'd get smashed and he'd say the only way forward is to fight again in a couple of weeks. And that they're just mental health deteriorated off of that. Their physical health too. Like they were getting put in fights they weren't comfortable with. Just this idea that like you're really rolling the dice. Like as a trainer, if you're just letting, this will be good for you. You need to just keep getting experience. I know you got a bit hurt in that last fight, but we'll fight again in 2 weeks. Send him in there, he gets knocked out. You go, oh, shouldn't have done that. But that's his health. That could potentially hurt. You as a trainer go, oh, fucked up there. Like it's not like these guys are really rolling the dice with someone else's body, someone else's health. And the way that things often work in the sport, like in boxing, you'll hear they'll try to put on not all the time, boxing will do the same thing, but sometimes you try to put on a fight and a body gets involved and says that's too mismatched. Like I can't put that fight on. Obviously boxing gets away. Boxing probably does some of the worst of it, to be honest, but that's something that exists in boxing. I see in Muay Thai, like sometimes I'll be watching a show and I'll look at the lineup and I'll go, why is he fighting him? You know, like someone's flying from a state where they're considered an amateur and going up and fighting a seasoned pro. It comes to that. Every state represents amateur and pro differently, but I'll look at a poster and like, we don't need to mention names. I know who they are. And so do you. That you just look at one of these posters and go, why would you do that? Like whose idea was it to be like, because if you're just matchmaking from a pure kind of sporting sense, you would never even think to put those two names together. But you like, and this is something that I see like a lot. Like it's something that occurs monthly. Like I'll just look at a fight. I can think of like a couple off the top of my head that really stand out now and go like, it's A, why did the promotion even have the idea to put this fight on? But B, why did like both sides go, yeah, that is a fair fight? And it just comes back to this idea of if you're operating on this principle of like just fight anyone that comes in front of you, that's real Muay Thai. Yeah, sure. But like then if you want Muay Thai to be exactly how it is today in 5, 10, 15 years, keep doing it like that because it's never going to grow beyond the point that it is now if we just keep doing shit like this.
But it also works to, I guess, who the biggest audience of the shows is.
Yeah.
And if it's I'm the guy in Melbourne that sells 200 tickets, and most of my friends, the only Muay Thai fighters they know is me, John Wayne Parr, and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Then if I bring a guy from New South Wales and say he's had 30 fights, even though 28 of them were amateur world title fights, the crowd doesn't get the difference. So, and the guys in maybe New South Wales or Victoria going to another state, I shouldn't just say about New South Wales, we're just as bad as everyone else. It's to fill up a fight and sell some tickets.
Yeah.
You know, like the audience isn't, we're all doing show by show. Like, can I cash out this show and make as much money as possible and then do another show? And like my friend Michael Vukovic said, it's so funny. He goes, and it's like prison yard rules where none of us will ever dob the others into the screws. It's like no promoter will go call up a guy and go, man, what are you doing with that fight?
Yeah.
We all go, they put it up. We all have to like it and share it because like, otherwise you look like a shithead for not being supportive.
Yeah.
And then you kind of just go, okay, cool. And then we're all doing it. Everyone does it. It's
do you think there should be like do you reckon there'll ever be a thing where promoters are kind of getting together going, okay guys, let's be for real here. You know, we don't need these type of matches for our sport, but I don't know. I can't really see that happening for me. Like, yeah, because there's so many promoters now, but some of the top ones though, like, you know, they're doing the good things. Because you just look at the cards and you go, this is great matchmaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, yeah, but then you see other ones and you go, whoa, I guess, yeah, fuck it. The boy must.
I mean, you wouldn't have, I don't know. Like, if I don't mention a name, it's not because I've forgotten. I'm not singling him out. But you wouldn't have seen too many big mismatch fights on Epic, on Domination, on Muay Thai Grand Prix, really.
Yeah.
There's sometimes one or two fights that you go, that doesn't make sense. But nothing where you go, you don't see it on Eruption. I haven't seen Eruption fights where I go, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
I've only seen 2 or 3 of Lewis's show, SRG shows. I think they match it up. They're well-meaning. I haven't seen it on Siam to Sydney. I haven't seen bad matchups on Warriors Way. Last week's hardcore show, man, like all the fights were quite close. Yeah, like there's a few like Hammer show. I don't think you would have ever seen fights where you go, that's a gross, like it's a mismatch. Like there is a few people that do it. But there's like, it's people who've done their time, I guess, through the industry, and their sport, like Thai boxing is the sport that they have at their gyms or that they like really attached to, and they kind of don't want to soil it too much.
Yeah.
We all like, I always say, I'm like, man, if I come up with a really dumb fight, I don't know how the hell, like I chat to Don and Andrew all the time. I'm like, what am I going to say to them? Like, how would I honestly be able to honestly say to them, no, it's going to be a good fight? Or like at the end of the fight, if Ton or Jump or Jojo, my Thai trainers, walk past and say, oh, you put that fight on? Like they're like my conscience. I'm like, how would I say that? So I think there is shows that genuinely mean to do it. And like, you know, we speak to each other, and like Paul, like I've been to Eruption and he calls me, or when he's been to my show, we talk afterwards. Like there is good events there. There's a lot of stuff around it though that's just not good. But again, I just think for it to change, the fighters have to do it and go, you know, like there's guys that I feel like I do a semi-okay job building fighters' names through bringing international opponents out from interstate opponents, doing profiles, photos, building up on a night. And then sometimes I watch them, how they behave if they get offered an easy title or a main event fight. And I'm like, I'll see what you're about, because you thought it was all great that I spent $10,000 bringing someone over for you to fight. Now let's see how you behave when you get offered something that you think looks shiny on your Facebook, but do you deep down think that's a legitimate thing? So it's interesting. I think it comes down a lot to the fighters, but man, like we got to change something about it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And your idea that like we don't need titles right now, it's not a way that I'd framed it in my own mind, but I think participation wise, Australian Muay Thai has grown a lot the last few years. But as far as like, you know, kind of like the level that we're producing into, it's probably been a fair plateau. Probably.
But here, we've had a year where most countries can't fly into each other. And even in Australia, most states can't fight into each other. Why do we have national and international titles on the line?
Yes, great point.
Like, I'm sorry, just as a bang on, like what's happening around the world, like in Thailand was shut down their stadiums for a couple of periods.
Yeah.
Why do we have to have titles that imply a crossover of territories? Like, how's that realistic? Like, does it become the world champion of right now?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Like, I always joke when people go, I think you used to go to the Mundials for Jiu-Jitsu and win the white belt division. I'm like, what does that make you? Does that make you the best in the world at not having trained for that long? Like, it's when they have a boxing silver world title, a boxing gold world title, a boxing diamond world title, and then they've got a franchise title. It's like, what is that? What other sport could you imagine having the Australian Open silver champion? You were the guy that won the matches that other people didn't play, but you're also the Australian Open champion. It's like, no, you're not. Yeah. This is the AFL Premiership for the guys at the bottom 6 of the ladder.
Yeah, like the C-class Premier.
Yeah, imagine like the AFL just went, okay, there's no interstate travel. There's more teams in Victoria. They'll just play each other, and we'll call those guys the 2020 AFL champions. But it was just the Victorian clubs because we couldn't travel everywhere else. Then that's the championship, right? It's like,
yeah,
how does this work?
Yeah, it's like I guess the title approach that we see for the most part. It's that immediate gratification stuff. It's like, okay, I can't put on a legitimate world title right now. So I'll put on like the best world title I can think of with the resources that I have, and it'll just be elevated. I'll elevate the stat rather than waiting until I have something legitimate. I'll just elevate what I have to that position. But it's like, to your point, maybe for where Muay Thai in Australia is at right now, we need everyone to put their hand up and go, right, I'm happy to keep fighting with no titles for the next couple of years, and just let the sport be built on fighters' merit for a while. See who sticks around. See how many guys go, yeah, I want to do Muay Thai, but if I can't win a belt, I'll just go over and do MMA. You know, I'll go and do something else because I'm more about the actual title than the achievement of it. Let like the top end actually come out, because when you take titles away and people can't strategize about where they fight to get something put on Instagram, and they just fight each other, let that happen for a few years, and then you'll have a legitimate top 5 in every weight class because people are just fighting, they're not holding out, and then you can add the titles back in. Because
then it goes also to who gets to decide who's like, it's, you know, I'm like, we bag sanctioning bodies, but if 2 legitimately best guys in the world fight for Sy's Muay Thai Union world title, but they're legitimately the 2 best guys, like, that title means something. Like, I will never call this a world title, but the fact that Toby Smith has a Rebellion belt, I think there's one guy better in the world than him, and that's Hamza, or equal. And if they both at their peak fitness, would be fucking amazing.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
But like, and Hamza's got a WBC world title, and I'm like, I reckon Hamza's the best guy in the world, and that WBC title is as legitimate as it gets.
Yeah,
I think George and Charlie have a very legitimate claim to be top 3 or 4 best guys at super middleweight, light heavyweight, whatever they're doing. So like titles like there's, you go look at it and you go, man, there's legitimately good guys, but at the same time, some other titles, like there was an event recently where there was like a bunch of junior world champions crowned. I'm like, how are they world? How does that mean anything? Like, think about any other sport in the world. If you're the world weightlifting champion, if you're the fastest man on earth, if you're Usain Bolt, I don't get to be the fastest man on earth in Victoria. Like, I just don't.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Like, imagine that. I'm going to form an athletics union and just race like kids.
It just crown some dude.
Yeah.
What mean some dude? I think I'd like run 100 in like 35 seconds if I don't cramp in my calves. How fast do you reckon Sintai would run 100 meters? Maybe I'll race him.
I'd watch it.
That's a good race.
The battle for the fastest man in the world. I'll just promote it, like run Facebook ads, see if anyone says anything. I'll just say, oh, look, the IAAF is pretty corrupt. And this is what we do.
This is it. This is the new era. This is what we're going to do.
I'm the fastest man in the world the way we sanction it.
Yeah, exactly.
In our rules, I'm faster than Usain Bolt.
Whoever runs the 100 closest to 35 seconds is the world champion.
All right, cool. So we're running a little bit out of time here. That one. She's messaging me. but like, you know, closing thoughts from here. So like, you know, like this episode was good. It's gonna rustle a lot of jimmies, but that's a good thing. Because like
that's what we were hoping for.
It's a discussion point. It's now it's open. Now I'll be very interested in the responses we get from this episode when it does come out from here.
And everyone who pulls out of my show in 2 months.
Well, that's so. So it seems to be where the direction everyone's all the good guys are focusing on now.
Yeah.
As well. Like, you know, we need to like, you know, we're taking the positive side from it, but we still have to put in the mind how the positive move the sports forward, get it more mainstream, more participation, and like, you know, and just like breed this new generation of fighters, like, you know, like just for experience and just do it. Because like at the moment, you're not going to get paid mega bucks. And like, you know, instead of focus on the shiny things, like do it. It's a self-development thing, like buy, like, but obviously the coaches will like, you know, ethically.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's just like, I think the best point that I think, or like one of the most important points that you made over the course of this conversation is that fighters have to start behaving differently. Because like, if you keep, like, it's easy to sit back and say, there's a lot of titles going around that don't mean anything, but do you apply that logic? Like, how many people say this title that I meant means nothing? Not many. Yeah. They'll say, I'm the Australian champion. But what? Who'd you fight? Someone from down the road that is on all the same shows that you've never been to state. Like, how can you have, like, people just have to apply some logic to their own career achievements. Like, you can call yourself a world champion, fine, but are you really? What does it mean to be a world champion? You know, like, I think coaches have to behave differently about what and the expectations they set for their fighters. Like, we all see it. Gyms just seem to be in total fights every weekend, and that's their thing because they can come home, put the belt up on the wall, and everyone's running businesses, and you know, even fighters are running a business in the sense of their own development. But do you want the instant gratification now, or do you want to really roll towards something big in the future? And I feel like it's the short-term gains that most of the promoters in question can't see past. It's like, yes, you will sell, you know, X amount of tickets because you put a title on that means nothing on this card, but you will do nothing to elevate the status of your brand in the sport as a whole. But I get it. I don't run a promotional business. So it's easy for me to say that people need to act with more integrity and sacrifice short-term financial gains. But like, at some stage, people, I guess, have to start caring about what they're building rather than what they can do right now.
Well, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. And that's essentially, I'm not grandstanding. Maybe I am. I'm saying, for me, I can't say I've got a problem with it, but be part of the problem. So I'm like, I'm not doing titles, and I'm not disputing some of the titles that are out there, but I won't do it. And I'm like, how many trainers and fighters that say they want the sport to change, will they do the same? And that's it.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So next show, May 29th. From here, we'll
28th. Yeah.
Yeah, 28th. That's right. Yeah, change. That's right. I remember it. 28th. Sorry, 28th. So this, we'll see. Like, Sy's given the deadline a year to change if the sport's going to go in the right direction. And especially a lot of people that are listening now, it's really in your hands.
Yeah, and like, I know we got some listeners that this applies to, like people I talk to. I don't call people out individually, but like, you know who you are. Like, I hope we get to keep you, Sy.
No, look, man, I know I've done stuff that I look back and go, I wish I hadn't done that. And maybe this interview will be one of them. But like, it's like, let's do it. Like, it's like a fresh start.
Yeah.
If you're a fighter that thinks there's too many titles in the sport, there's too much bullshit, the next time you get offered it, say no. And if you don't break your trainer's balls and say, hey, give me a title fight when you know you haven't.
Yeah.
Just like be honest about it. And I'm curious how many people will actually do it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too, because I would like to say a lot would. Like, I don't know. I think there is some, like, there's definitely people who would, but I'm not sold either way on what the response to that would be.
There's a lot of shows that have been very full of audiences. Domination's been doing it for years. They've had packed crowds. Eruption's done it. Hammers Warriors Way. I don't remember seeing that many titles on it. People still come. They come for the event. They come for the matchups. And Hammers, like, even with titles with their guys, they've been he only fights for certain things. Like, let's do it. Like, let's not put your money where your mouth is. We can do it. You can be honest about it and see if you can actually start a thing where we all just agree. Like, if I'm not the best guy in Victoria, I'm not going to walk around with a state title.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, like, in closing, it's like, care more about being the best than having the trophy, right?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, like, it's sport. Like, do you want the achievement or just? And that's like, we give people these little cheap pathways. But like, people are trying to go the way where they can call themselves a state champion rather than actually become a state champion. So yeah, it's on you, Australian Muay Thai. Do you give a shit about, becoming the best, or do you give a shit about just coming up with accolades?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, cool. So we'll leave it there. But yeah, stick around after the intro there, Sy, from that one. And yeah, but everyone else, catch you next time. Maybe like, share, review. I'll be very interested on a follow count after this. All right? But we'll catch you next time, guys.
See ya.
See you guys.